September 4, 1942. The waters near Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. An inky black night with low haze obscuring all landmarks. The high-speed transport USS Gregory patrols these treacherous waters. Waters that would soon earn the name Iron Bottom Sound for the number of ships that would rest on its floor. At 12:56 a.m. on September 5th, flashes of gunfire pierced the darkness. Within minutes, the Gregory would be at the bottom of the Pacific. And a 22-year-old mess attendant named Charles Jackson French would begin an 8-hour swim that would save 15 lives, and test the very limits of human endurance and courage. This is his story. A story of extraordinary heroism that was celebrated, then forgotten. A story of racial segregation in America's military. And a story that demands to be remembered. Charles Jackson French was born on September 25, 1919 in Foreman, Arkansas, a small town in the segregated South where opportunities for Black Americans were severely limited. Tragedy struck early when both of Charles's parents died, leaving him an orphan. But young Charles had a gift. At the age of 8 he learned to swim in the Red River. In those waters color didn't matter. Strength did. Endurance did. And Charles French had both in abundance. He became an exceptional swimmer, powerful and tireless, skills that seemed unremarkable at the time, but would one day mean the difference between life and death for 15 men. After his parents' deaths, Charles moved north to Omaha, Nebraska, to live with his older sister, Viola. Like thousands of Black Americans during the Great Migration, the French family sought better opportunities away from the Jim Crow South. Charles found work, attended school, and grew into a strong, quiet young man with a powerful build and a determined spirit. But in Omaha, as everywhere in America, segregation followed. Swimming pools were segregated. Restaurants were segregated. And when Charles French looked toward a future of service to his country, he would find that the United States Navy was segregated too. On December 4, 1937, at age 18, Charles Jackson French enlisted in the United States Navy. But his color determined his role. African Americans were barred from serving in combat positions unless in segregated units. Instead, they were relegated to the Steward branch, the only positions open to Black men in the Navy. French was assigned to the USS Houston, flagship of the Asiatic Fleet, as a mess attendant 3rd class. His duties? Serve meals to white officers and sailors. Clear their tables. Clean their quarters. Keep the mess hall spotless. The Black press derisively called these men seagoing bellhops. A cruel but accurate description of how Black sailors were viewed. But French took pride in his work. The Houston cruised the Pacific, Hawaii, the Philippines, Shanghai. For 4 years, French served with distinction, learning discipline, seamanship, and the unspoken rules of a segregated military. He completed his enlistment in November 1941 and returned to Omaha with an honorable discharge. Charles French was home. He lived with his sister Viola at 2703 North 25th Street. He was a civilian again. He had served his country and was free to build a life in Omaha. But freedom for Charles French would last exactly 1 month. December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor plunged America into World War II. Across the nation, men rushed to enlist. And Charles Jackson French, who had already served 4 years, who had earned his discharge just weeks earlier, walked into the nearest recruitment office. When asked why he was re-enlisting so quickly, French's answer was simple. I want to do my part because I'm already trained and I can start right away. On December 19, 1941, just 12 days after Pearl Harbor, Charles Jackson French re-enlisted in the United States Navy as a steward's mate 1st class. He would return to the only role the Navy permitted him, serving food, cleaning quarters, being invisible. But Charles French was about to become anything but invisible. In March 1942, French joined the crew of the USS Gregory, designated APD-3, a converted World War I destroyer that had been stripped of most of its armament and refitted as a high-speed transport. Her mission? To carry Marines and launch boats for amphibious assault operations in the Pacific Theater. The Gregory was part of Transport Division 12, training along the East Coast with Marine divisions, perfecting amphibious landing techniques. In January 1942, the division departed Charleston for Pearl Harbor. After more training in Hawaiian waters, they returned to San Diego for repairs, then headed back to Pearl Harbor in June. Their destination, the Solomon Islands. The scene of America's first major offensive in the Pacific. A place that would test every man aboard to his limits. On July 31, 1942, the Gregory departed Noumea, New Caledonia, joining Task Force 62 under Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Their objective, Guadalcanal, a strategic island in the Solomons that would become one of the war's bloodiest campaigns. August 7, 1942. The Gregory sent her Marines ashore in the first assault waves. The invasion was initially successful, but everyone knew the Japanese would fight back fiercely. These waters, soon to be known as Iron Bottom Sound for the ships that would sink there, became a killing ground. For the next month, the Gregory and her sister ships remained in the area, patrolling the contested waters, running supplies from Espiritu Santo, and transporting Marine Raider battalions to various islands. Each mission was dangerous. Each night patrol could be their last. And through it all, Mess Attendant Charles French served meals, cleaned quarters, and waited. He wasn't a gunner. He wasn't an officer. He was a cook, one of 6 black men in the crew. But when the night of September 4th arrived, his role would change forever. September 4, 1942. The Gregory and her sister ship, the USS Little, had just completed a mission transporting a Marine Raider battalion to Savo Island. As darkness fell, they needed to return to their anchorage at Tulagi. But the night was inky black with low haze obscuring all landmarks. Rather than risk threading their way through the dangerous channel in complete darkness, the captains decided to remain on patrol, steaming at 10 knots between Guadalcanal and Savo Island. They had no way of knowing that 3 Japanese destroyers, the Udachi, Hatsuyuki, and Murakumo, had entered the area undetected, part of the Tokyo Express bringing supplies to Japanese forces on Guadalcanal. At 12:56 a.m. on September 5th, the crews of the Gregory and Little saw flashes of gunfire in the distance. They assumed it came from a Japanese submarine. Their radar showed 4 targets. But before they could react, a U.S. Navy patrol pilot, also believing the gunfire came from a submarine, dropped 5 parachute flares almost directly above the 2 American ships. Suddenly, the Gregory and Little were silhouetted against the night sky like targets in a shooting gallery. The Japanese destroyers spotted them immediately and opened fire at 1 a.m. The Gregory brought all her guns to bear, but she was desperately overmatched. A converted World War I destroyer with minimal armament facing 3 modern Japanese destroyers. The Japanese gunners were devastatingly accurate. Less than 3 minutes after the flares lit the sky, the Gregory was dead in the water. 2 boilers burst. Decks became a mass of flames. Everyone on the bridge was killed, except one man, Ensign Robert Adrian, a young Naval Academy graduate on his first combat assignment. The ship's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Harry F. Bauer, was seriously wounded. With the ship sinking beneath him, he ordered 2 sailors to help another crewman who was calling for help, refusing assistance for himself. Bauer was never seen again. For his final act of selflessness, he would posthumously receive the Silver Star. At 1:15 a.m., just 19 minutes after the first shots were fired, Commander Bauer gave the order, "Abandon ship." The Gregory's crew took to the water, into darkness, into fire, into chaos. And then at 1:23 a.m., the Japanese destroyers began firing again, not at the sinking ships but at the helpless men in the water. Charles Jackson French hit the water with oil burning around him, Japanese shells exploding, and the screams of dying men in his ears. At 22 years old, this mess attendant from Arkansas was about to become something else entirely, a lifesaver. Despite standing just 5 feet 8 inches and weighing 195 pounds, French was a powerful swimmer. While others panicked, he began swimming through the darkness, gathering injured sailors. He found a life raft, and in and around it 15 men, all seriously wounded, all white, unable to move the raft themselves. Among them was Ensign Robert Adrian. Wounded by shrapnel in his legs and eyes, Adrian had waded into the water as the ship sank beneath him. He found the raft, climbed aboard, and assessed their dire situation. The raft was adrift. The current was pulling them toward the shore, toward Guadalcanal, toward Japanese-held territory. If they landed there wounded and defenseless, their fate was certain: capture, torture, execution. Ensign Adrian understood they needed to move away from shore, but how? The wounded men couldn't paddle. They could barely hold on. And then Charles French appeared in the water beside the raft. French looked at the raft full of wounded men, his white officers, his shipmates who had never eaten a meal with him, who used segregated facilities, who would never have been permitted to swim in the same pool with him during training. And he made a decision. He found a rope. He tied it around his waist. He tied the other end to the raft. And then he said words that would echo through naval history.
Just keep telling me if I'm going the right way.
Adrian, even in his wounded state, told French it was impossible. One man couldn't tow a raft full of 15 wounded sailors against the current, away from shore, through the darkness. It couldn't be done. Charles French shed his waterlogged clothes. He adjusted the rope around his waist. And he began to swim. For the next 6 to 8 hours, through the darkest part of the night, Charles Jackson French became the engine of survival for 15 men. Stroke after stroke, pull after pull, against the current, away from the enemy shore, into the endless Pacific. Imagine the effort. The raft with 15 men weighed hundreds of pounds. The rope cut into his flesh. His arms burned. His legs cramped. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But French kept swimming. And then came the sharks. Attracted by blood and chaos, the fins began to circle. In his interview years later with author Chester Wright, French described what happened next.
I got the hell scared out of me. I noticed there were sharks circling around that raft, waiting for their dinner. So I thought, what's worse, them sharks or the Japanese? I just froze and tried to surface and float, get my feet out of the water. I just keep paddling. I nearly peed on myself when one of them sharks touched my feet.
The sharks brushed against him. But French made himself focus. One stroke, then another. Just keep swimming. Just keep the men safe. On the raft, the wounded men watched in awe. They urged French to stop, to climb aboard and rest. But French refused. He told them he was more afraid of the Japanese than the sharks. And he kept swimming. 2 hours passed. Then 4. Then 6. French's body was shutting down. Hypothermia set in. Exhaustion nearly overwhelmed him. But he would not stop. He would not quit. These were his shipmates. His duty was to save them. Finally, as the first light of dawn broke across the Pacific on September 5, 1942, French had pulled the raft far enough from enemy territory to give them a chance. He had swum through the night, 6 to 8 hours of continuous effort that defies comprehension. And then salvation. A scout aircraft spotted the raft and radioed for help. A marine landing craft was dispatched. At sunrise, Charles Jackson French and the 15 men he had saved were pulled from the water. All 15 men survived because of French. Every single one. The rescued men were taken to a rest camp. And there, something happened that Charles French would remember for the rest of his life. Something that showed both the casual cruelty of segregation and the fierce loyalty of brothers in arms. The master-at-arms moved to separate French from the white sailors, as regulations required. But the men French had saved, wounded, exhausted, covered in oil and blood, stood up as one. In an interview years later, French recalled their words, tears in his eyes.
He is a member of the Gregory's crew. He damned well will stay right here with the rest of us. Anybody who tries to take him anywhere had better be ready to go to general quarters, with all of us. So for near on to 5 minutes there be a standoff. Us covered with oil and grime in our hair, and all over our clothes and our eyes. And them clean master-at-arms folks. We must have looked like wild men. Them white boys stood up for me.
In that moment the men saw no color. They saw the man who had saved their lives. They saw their brother. And they refused to let segregation tear them apart. Of the Gregory's crew, only 11 men were lost. French was one of 6 sailors who swam through the night, rescuing their shipmates. But his feet stood apart. 8 hours. 15 men. 1 rope. 1 man's strength. And will. October 21, 1942. Hollywood, California. Ensign Robert Adrian sat in the NBC Broadcasting Company studios for a weekly radio program called It Happened in the Service. His shrapnel wounds were healing, but the memory of that night was still fresh. Adrian told the story on national radio. He had never learned French's full name. On the ship, everyone just called him French. But Adrian made sure America knew what this mess attendant had done.
I can assure you that all the men on that raft are grateful to Mess Attendant French for his brave action off Guadalcanal that night.
The story exploded, particularly in the black press. The Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier, and other African-American newspapers celebrated French as Hero of the Year. The Baltimore Afro-American wrote, "All those who thrill to high heroism are paying tribute to a black boy from Arkansas, who risked his life that his white comrades might live. We did not learn about this act of heroism from the Navy Department. We learned about it almost incidentally from Ensign Robert Adrian, white officer of the destroyer Gregory." On October 30, 1942, Charles Jackson French returned home to Omaha to a hero's welcome. He and his sister Viola were honored at halftime during a Creighton University football game. On November 11, Armistice Day, French led the Pledge of Allegiance before a crowd at the Omaha Auditorium, the largest gathering since the end of World War I. His image appeared on War Gum trading card number 129, titled Negro Swimmer Tows Survivors, making him one of the only African-American servicemen to be featured among generals and war heroes during World War II. His story was illustrated in newspaper comic strips and on a wartime calendar. True Comics magazine published a dramatic retelling. French appeared at war bond rallies, his story told to inspire Americans to support the war effort. There was even talk of a Hollywood film. For a brief moment, Charles Jackson French was famous. Based on Ensign Adrian's incident report, French was recommended for the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration, below only the Medal of Honor. It was the same medal awarded to Dory Miller for his heroism at Pearl Harbor. But French would never receive it. In May 1943, 8 months after that night in the Pacific, French received a letter. A letter of commendation from Admiral William F. Bull Halsey, Jr., commander of the Southern Pacific Fleet. It read, "For meritorious conduct in action while serving on board a destroyer transport which was badly damaged during the engagement with Japanese forces in the British Solomon Islands on September 5, 1942. After the engagement, a group of about 15 men were adrift on a raft, which was being deliberately shelled by Japanese naval forces. French tied a line to himself and swam for more than 2 hours without rest, thus attempting to tow the raft. His conduct was in keeping with the highest traditions of the naval service." 2 hours? Not 6 to 8? Admiral Halsey's letter reduced French's heroic 8-hour ordeal to just 2 hours. Ensign Adrian was outraged. He knew the truth. So did the other survivors. But the Navy's version became official. The situation was complicated by the posthumous award of the Silver Star to Lieutenant Commander H.F. Bauer, the Gregory's commanding officer who gave his life helping his crew. By Navy standards, it would be unprecedented for a subordinate, especially a mess attendant, to receive a higher decoration than his superior officer. But there was another reason, one that went unspoken but was understood by everyone. Charles Jackson French was black. And in 1943, a segregated Navy and a segregated America was not prepared to elevate a black mess attendant above his white officers, no matter how extraordinary his heroism. Years later, the Omaha World Herald would note the bitter irony. Future President John F. Kennedy received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for towing a wounded crewman after PT-109 sank. French towed 15 men for 8 hours and received only a letter. Charles Jackson French did not rest on his laurels. He returned to sea, serving on the USS Endicott as it escorted convoys in the Atlantic Theater, along the African coast and in the Caribbean. When the Endicott needed repairs in May 1944, French was reassigned to the USS Frankfurt. And on June 6, 1944, Charles French, Mess Attendant, Hero of Guadalcanal, was there for D-Day. The Frankfurt provided gunfire support for the Normandy landings, rescued survivors of mined ships, drove off German E-boat attacks and saved downed pilots. In August 1944, the Frankfurt arrived in Naples for the invasion of southern France. Throughout it all, French served in the mess, performing his duties with the same quiet excellence he had shown since 1937. He also served during the Korean War, continuing his naval career for years. When World War II ended, Charles French faded from the public eye. The war bond rallies stopped. The newspapers moved on to other stories. The hero of Guadalcanal was forgotten. Charles Jackson French settled in San Diego, California after the war. Like so many veterans, he struggled with what we now understand as post-traumatic stress disorder. He battled alcoholism, a condition that often afflicted those who had endured the trauma of combat and near-death experiences. On November 7, 1956, some sources say November 11, Charles Jackson French died in San Diego. He was just 37 years old. His death merited barely 2 paragraphs in the local San Diego press. The man who had saved 15 lives, who had swum for 8 hours through shark-infested waters, who had been celebrated as a national hero, died in obscurity. He was laid to rest at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery in San Diego with full military honors. His grave is in Section N, Grave 490. For decades, few people visited. Few people remembered. But Ensign Robert Adrian never forgot. Robert Adrian rarely spoke about the war with his family. The trauma stayed with him, not just from the Gregory but from another attack almost exactly 1 year later when he was gunnery officer on the USS Boyd. 11 men died in that attack, burned alive, and Adrian led the rescue efforts. The nightmares never left him. But there was one story he told his family again and again, the story of a black mess attendant named French. If not for that man, Adrian would tell his children, none of you would be alive. I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here. Your children wouldn't be here. Adrian retired from the Navy in 1966 after a distinguished career. He tried repeatedly to have French properly recognized, speaking to Navy officials, writing letters, telling the story to anyone who would listen. After his second retirement from banking, he wrote an article called Our Night of Hell Off Guadalcanal, Fortin Canale, a newsletter for destroyer veterans. Adrian died in 2011 without seeing French receive the recognition he deserved. But before he died, he told his children, "This is your mission now. Make sure Charles Jackson French is remembered." His daughters, Judy Decker and Joni Morgan, promised they would.
We credit him for saving not only our dad, but 15 sailors, and all of us children and all of us grandchildren and all of us great-grandchildren. It's due to French.
In 2009, the International Swimming Hall of Fame in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, created an exhibition about Charles Jackson French. Historian Bruce Wigo researched French's story and was stunned by what he found. One of the most remarkable acts of swimming heroism in history, almost completely forgotten. The Hall of Fame commissioned a painting showing French towing the raft through dark waters. It became part of their permanent collection, a reminder of what one swimmer could accomplish when lives depended on it. But it wasn't until April 2021 that French's story truly began to reach a new generation. An online post about French from the International Swimming Hall of Fame went viral on social media. Veterans, historians, and ordinary Americans were outraged that they'd never heard this story. Malcolm Nance, a Navy veteran and intelligence officer, tweeted, "How is it this sailor's story is not Navy legend?" Other veterans echoed the call. Change.org petitions appeared, demanding French be posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. The post caught the attention of Rear Admiral Charles Brown, the Navy's public affairs officer. He responded publicly, "Thanks for highlighting this heroic story. We'll work with the Chief of Naval Operations and look into whether we can do more to recognize Petty Officer French." Visuals: Nebraska Congressional Delegation. Nebraska's congressional delegation, Representatives Don Bacon, Jeff Fortenberry, and Adrian Smith, co-sponsored House Resolution 4168 to rename a post office in Omaha for French. Congressman Bacon, a retired Air Force brigadier general, went further, petitioning the Navy to consider French for a posthumous Navy Cross. The Navy opened an investigation. They reviewed the original incident reports, interviewed historians, examined Ensign Adrian's testimony, and consulted with the International Swimming Hall of Fame. The evidence was overwhelming. Charles Jackson French deserved recognition. May 26, 2022. Washington Navy Yard. 80 years after that night in the Pacific, the United States Navy finally corrected a grave injustice. Secretary of the Navy Carlos del Toro announced that Charles Jackson French would posthumously receive the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, the highest non-combat decoration for heroism. It was the same medal awarded to John F. Kennedy for his actions after PT-109 sank.
Petty Officer French's actions epitomize the core values of honor, courage, and commitment. His story deserves to be told and retold, not just as a tale of individual heroism, but as a reminder of the contributions of all African American sailors who served their country with distinction despite facing systemic discrimination.
French's great-niece, Viola Pitchford, and other family members attended the ceremony. They held photographs of Charles, young, strong, proud in his Navy uniform. At last, their uncle was being honored as he should have been 8 decades ago. The Navy and Marine Corps Medal citation reads, "For heroic conduct while serving on board USS Gregory during the Battle of Guadalcanal on September 5, 1942. After his ship was destroyed by enemy fire and sunk, Petty Officer French risked his life to save the lives of his shipmates. Despite the presence of sharks and enemy fire, he swam continuously for more than 6 hours, towing a raft with 15 wounded sailors to safety." 6 hours? Not 2. The Navy had finally acknowledged the truth. Charles Jackson French's story cannot be understood without understanding the broader context of African American service during World War II. Of the 2.5 million Black Americans who registered for the draft, 909,000 served in the armed forces. Yet they served in a segregated military, fighting for a country that denied them basic civil rights. Until 1942, Black men could only serve in the Navy as mess attendants and stewards, seagoing bellhops serving white officers. They were paid less, promoted less, and recognized less. When Dory Miller manned an anti-aircraft gun during the Pearl Harbor attack and shot down 4 Japanese planes, he became the first African American to receive the Navy Cross, but only after the black press and civil rights organizations demanded his recognition. It wasn't until January 1944 that the Navy commissioned its first black officers, the Golden 13, and even then they faced discrimination at every turn. The Navy didn't fully integrate until 1948, after President Truman's Executive Order 9981. Charles French served through all of this. From 1937 to 1942, then through the end of World War II and into the Korean War. He endured indignities, served with excellence, saved 15 lives, and received a letter when he deserved a medal. His story is not just about one man's heroism, it's about a system that refused to see that heroism because of the color of his skin. What happened to the 15 men Charles French saved? They went home. They built lives. They had children and grandchildren. Because one man refused to quit. Ensign Robert Adrian continued serving in the Navy, rising to commander before retiring in 1966. He worked in banking, married, raised a family. Every Thanksgiving he would tell his children, "Be thankful for Charles Jackson French. Without him, none of us would be here." The other 14 survivors scattered across America. Many never spoke about that night. The trauma was too deep. But they knew. They remembered the man in the water who would not let them die. Today those 15 men have hundreds of descendants. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Entire family trees that exist because Charles Jackson French tied a rope around his waist and swam for 8 hours through shark-infested waters. Every one of those lives, every birthday, every graduation, every wedding, every moment of joy, is a testament to what one man can do when he refuses to give up. That is Charles French's true legacy, not just 15 lives saved, but generations of lives made possible. What Charles French accomplished is almost beyond human comprehension. Bruce Wigo, CEO of the International Swimming Hall of Fame, called it one of the greatest acts of heroic swimming in recorded history. But what exactly did French's body endure that night? Swimming is one of the most physically demanding activities humans can perform. In optimal conditions, swimming continuously for more than 2 hours requires exceptional fitness and mental fortitude. Elite marathon swimmers train for years to achieve such endurance. But French wasn't swimming in optimal conditions. He was towing a raft with 15 wounded men, a combined weight of at least 3,000 pounds, likely more. He was fighting against ocean currents. He was swimming in darkness, unable to see where he was going, relying on directions shouted from the raft. The water temperature in the Solomon Islands in September hovers around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, warm by some standards, but extended exposure still causes hypothermia. After 6 to 8 hours, French's core body temperature would have dropped dangerously low. His muscles would have been cramping. His body would have been shutting down. And then there was the psychological burden. The sharks circling. The knowledge that Japanese ships might return. The screams of dying men still echoing in his ears. The weight of knowing that 15 lives depended entirely on whether he could take one more stroke. And then another. And then another. Today's Navy SEALs, among the world's most elite warriors, train extensively for water survival and rescue operations. Their instructors use French's story as an example of what human willpower can achieve. But even they acknowledge, what French did that night pushes the absolute limits of human endurance. Today, if you visit Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery in San Diego, you can find Charles Jackson French's grave in Section N, Grave 490. The white marble headstone now reflects his Navy and Marine Corps medal, an honor added posthumously in 2022. Visitors leave flowers. Veterans leave challenge coins. Swimmers from around the world make pilgrimages to pay their respects to one of history's greatest open-water swimmers. At the International Swimming Hall of Fame in Fort Lauderdale, French's story is prominently displayed. The painting of him towing the raft hangs in a place of honor, ensuring that every young swimmer who visits learns about the man who used his gift to save lives. There have been calls to name a Navy ship after Charles Jackson French, a fitting tribute for a man who gave everything to save his shipmates. As of 2025, that campaign continues. In Omaha, Nebraska, where French lived with his sister Viola, there are ongoing efforts to ensure his story is taught in schools. The Charles Jackson French Post Office stands as a permanent reminder of the city's most heroic son. In Arkansas, where French was born, historians are working to establish memorials and educational programs about his life. The boy who learned to swim in the Red River became one of the Navy's greatest heroes. Charles Jackson French's story asks uncomfortable questions about the America he served. How many other heroes went unrecognized because of their race? How many acts of extraordinary courage were dismissed, minimized, or erased by a system built on segregation? The Navy that French served in 1942 was a segregated institution that limited what black sailors could do and how they could be recognized. Today's Navy is different. More diverse, more inclusive, more willing to honor all who serve with distinction. But that change didn't happen by accident. It happened because of men like French who proved their worth beyond any doubt, and because of advocates like Ensign Adrian who refused to let heroism go unrecognized. When young people today learn about Charles Jackson French, they learn more than a story of physical endurance. They learn about moral courage, the courage to do what's right even when the system is wrong. They learn about brotherhood, the white sailors who stood up for French when regulations said he should be separated. They learn about perseverance, not just French's 8-hour swim, but his decades of service in a Navy that undervalued him. French's story resonates with athletes who push their bodies to the limit. It resonates with military personnel who understand the bonds forged in combat. It resonates with anyone who has ever been underestimated because of who they are, and who has proven their worth through sheer determination. Why did Charles Jackson French do it? What made him tie that rope around his waist and swim for 8 hours when no one would have blamed him for saving himself? He never gave a grand explanation. In interviews he was humble, almost dismissive of his heroism. He said he was afraid of the Japanese. He said he just kept swimming. He said those were his shipmates, and shipmates don't leave each other behind. But perhaps the real answer lies in something deeper, in the values instilled by the Navy he joined at 18, in the strength developed in the Red River as a boy, in the quiet dignity with which he endured years of discrimination and kept serving anyway. Charles French saw 15 wounded men who couldn't save themselves. And he made a choice. Not because they were white and he was black. Not because they were officers and he was a mess attendant. But because they were human beings and he had the strength to save them. For 8 hours in the darkness against impossible odds, Charles Jackson French became what his shipmates would forever call him, the human tugboat. One man, one rope, 15 lives, and a legacy that will never be forgotten.
In all my years studying swimming history, I've never encountered a story quite like Charles Jackson French's. The physical achievement alone is staggering, but when you add the context, the segregation, the discrimination, the fact that he was risking his life for men who lived in a system that denied his humanity, it becomes something transcendent.
My father never forgot French. Never. He told us the story so many times that we felt like we knew Charles French personally. Dad would say, "That man is the reason you're alive." And then he'd say, "And the Navy gave him a letter." You could hear the anger in his voice, even decades later. Dad died without seeing French get the recognition he deserved. I'm so grateful that we lived to see it happen.
Petty Officer French's story reminds us that heroism has no color. Leadership has no color. Courage has no color. What matters is what you do when lives are on the line. French answered that question in the most powerful way possible, by refusing to quit for 8 hours. The Navy failed him in 1943. We cannot fail him again.
Learning about Charles French changed how I see the Navy and how I see myself. If he could serve with that much honor in a Navy that didn't honor him back, what's my excuse? He set a standard that we should all aspire to.
Charles Jackson French lived 37 years. He was born in poverty in segregated Arkansas. He was orphaned young. He learned to swim in a river. He joined a Navy that saw him as less than equal. He served 4 years, went home, and then volunteered to serve again the moment his country needed him. On one extraordinary night in September 1942, he did something that defied human limits. He swam for 8 hours. He towed 15 men to safety. He ignored the sharks, the exhaustion, the hypothermia, the fear. He saved every single man on that raft. And his country gave him a letter that minimized what he'd done. He didn't quit. He didn't complain publicly. He continued serving, through the rest of World War II, through D-Day, through the Korean War. He wore the uniform with pride even when that uniform represented an institution that didn't fully value him. He died too young, struggling with demons that many combat veterans face. He was buried with military honors but without the recognition he deserved. For decades he was forgotten, a footnote in naval history if mentioned at all. Visuals, 2022 ceremony, medal presentation. And then, 80 years later, the Navy finally admitted the truth. Charles Jackson French was a hero. His actions warranted a medal. His story deserved to be told. Justice delayed is justice denied, but even late justice matters. Today, Charles Jackson French's story is taught in schools. It's featured in museums. It's told to new Navy recruits as an example of what service truly means. It's shared on social media, spreading to millions who had never heard of the human tugboat. Open water swimmers around the world know his name. They attempt French swims, challenging themselves to swim for hours while towing weight, trying to comprehend what he endured. None have matched his feat under similar conditions. Most don't come close. Veterans visit his grave to pay respects. They leave medals, coins, flowers, and notes thanking him for his service and his sacrifice. His headstone is never without tribute. His family finally has the recognition that was denied them for 80 years. They can point to that Navy and Marine Corps medal and say, "Our uncle, our great-uncle was a hero." The United States Navy says so. History says so. And somewhere in America, hundreds of people, the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the 15 men French saved, are living their lives because one man refused to give up. Most will never know Charles French's name, but his DNA is written into their existence. He is the reason they are. The Pacific Ocean looks peaceful now. The waters near Guadalcanal where the USS Gregory sank are calm, giving no hint of the violence that occurred there more than 80 years ago. The ships that rest on Iron Bottom Sound are home to fish and coral. The men who fought and died there are mostly gone, their stories fading into history. But on one night in September 1942, in those dark waters, something happened that transcends war and politics and history. One human being looked at 15 others and said, "I will not let you die. Not on my watch. Not while I have strength left." Charles Jackson French was not perfect. He struggled with alcohol. He died young. He endured racism and discrimination. He was often invisible, dismissed, underestimated. But for 8 hours in the darkness he was a giant. Every stroke he took was an act of will. Every second he stayed in the water was a choice. He could have stopped. He could have saved himself. He could have said, "I've done enough." No one would have blamed him. He didn't stop. Because those were his brothers. Because lives depended on him. Because when it mattered most, Charles Jackson French chose to be a hero. The Navy and Marine Corps Medal citation for Charles Jackson French ends with these words. His actions reflect great credit upon himself and were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. Those words, written 80 years too late, still carry weight. They are an admission. We should have honored you then. We should have seen your courage for what it was. We should have judged you by what you did, not by the color of your skin. The Navy that Charles French joined is not the Navy that exists today. Progress has been made. Barriers have fallen. But his story reminds us that progress is never inevitable. It requires people willing to prove their worth against unjust odds, and it requires others willing to speak up when injustice occurs. Robert Adrian spent decades trying to get French the recognition he deserved. He never stopped telling the story. He made sure his children knew the name of the man who saved him. That, too, is heroism, the courage to fight for what's right even when it takes a lifetime. If you visit San Diego, go to Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. Find Section N, Grave 490. Stand before the white marble headstone of Steward's mate First Class Charles Jackson French. And remember what one person can do. Remember that courage knows no color. Remember that heroism is measured by action, not rank. Remember that the greatest acts often come from the most unexpected people. Remember that 15 men lived because one man swam through the night. Remember Charles Jackson French, the orphan from Arkansas, the swimmer in the Red River, the mess attendant who wasn't supposed to be a hero, the human tugboat. Remember him. Tell his story. Make sure that never again does a hero go unrecognized for 80 years. Charles Jackson French. September 25, 1919 to November 7, 1956. American. Sailor. Hero. Thank you for watching. If you found Charles Jackson French's story as moving as we did, please like this video and share it with others. With so many lives and generations impacted, here's another example of history's greatest heroes often never heard of. Let's change that. In the comments, let us know, what other forgotten heroes of World War II should we cover? And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive historical documentaries. If you found this interesting, check out another story of the incredible contributions of the Red Ball Express.